While public attention was fixated on the Federal Reserve's latest rate decision in December 2025, inside the offices of the California State Water Resources Control Board, a regulatory amendment was filed that will fundamentally alter the ownership structure of the most critical resource in the continental United States. On December 11, 2025, institutional investors gained legal clearance to purchase perpetual water rights contracts in 17 western states. The initial transaction volume, $4.2 billion. The asset class, agricultural and municipal water allocation certificates, now tradable on secondary markets with zero regulatory oversight from the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. This is not about environmentalism. This is not about drought management. This is about the conversion of a survival resource into a financialized instrument with embedded leverage, counterparty risk, and systemic fragility identical to the mortgage-backed securities architecture that collapsed in 2008. The mechanism is already operational, the contracts are already trading, and the public has no idea that the price of water in Phoenix, Los Angeles, and Denver is now determined by the same institutions that control your pension fund.
Act 1.
The official narrative is simple. Western states face a structural water deficit. The Colorado River Basin has operated below sustainable capacity for 23 consecutive years. Lake Mead and Lake Powell are at 38% of historical average levels. Agricultural users in California's Central Valley are receiving 22% of contracted allocations. The solution, according to state regulators and federal agencies, is market efficiency. Allow water rights to be bought and sold, so we'll let price signals allocate scarcity. Farmers who cannot afford water will sell their rights to municipalities, and municipalities will sell surplus capacity to industrial users. The market will find equilibrium. This is the language of the World Bank. This is the language of the International Monetary Fund. This is the language used before every privatization event in the last 40 years, from British Rail to Argentine utilities to Greek port infrastructure. The pattern is consistent. Step 1, declare a crisis. Step 2, propose market reform. Step 3, transfer public assets to private balance sheets. Step 4, extract rent in perpetuity. But the visible story is never the full story. The question is not whether water markets exist. The question is who controls the market, what instruments they are using, and what happens when the system breaks. What happens when the system breaks.
Act 2.
Between January 2024 and November 2025, 3 asset management firms acquired controlling stakes in water rights across 7 western states. BlackRock, through its infrastructure division, purchased $2.1 billion in California agricultural water contracts. Brookfield Asset Management secured $1.4 billion in Arizona municipal supply agreements. The Carlyle Group, via a subsidiary registered in Delaware, acquired $800 million in Colorado River allocation certificates. These are not passive investments. These are not index funds. These are active positions in a market with inelastic demand, zero substitutes, and regulatory capture at the state level. The architecture is deliberate. Water rights are purchased through limited liability entities. These entities lease the rights back to the original agricultural or municipal users at variable rates tied to spot market pricing. The spot market is determined by a private exchange operated by a consortium that includes the same asset managers who own the underlying contracts. This is vertical integration of a survival resource. This is the same structural flaw that allowed Enron to manipulate electricity prices in California in 2001, the same flaw that allowed investment banks to control aluminum warehousing and inflate premiums in 2013. The same flaw that allows 4 meatpacking companies to control 85% of U.S. beef processing and set wholesale prices with no competitive pressure. The regulatory response has been non-existent. The California Public Utilities Commission has no jurisdiction over water markets. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has no authority over non-electric resources. The Securities and Exchange Commission does not classify water rights as securities. The Commodity Futures Trading Commission does not classify them as commodities. This is a deliberate void. This is regulatory arbitrage, and it was engineered with precision. In March 2024, the American Water Works Association, a trade group representing private water utilities, submitted a policy proposal to the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners. The proposal recommended that water rights be classified as infrastructure assets, exempt from securities regulation, and eligible for institutional investment under the same framework as toll roads and airports. The proposal was drafted by a law firm that represents BlackRock, Brookfield, and Carlyle. It was endorsed by 14 state utility commissions within 6 months. It became the legal foundation for the December 2025 regulatory amendment in California. This is not conspiracy. This is standard operating procedure. This is how policy is made in the United States. Private interests draft legislation. Trade groups legitimize it. Regulatory agencies adopt it. The public learns about it years later, when the contracts are already signed and the leverage is already embedded.
Act 3.
The financial instrument at the center of the system is called a perpetual water allocation certificate. It is a contract that grants the holder the right to a specific volume of water per year, measured in acre-feet from a designated source. The certificate is transferable, it is divisible, and as of December 2025, it is eligible as collateral for secured lending. This is the critical detail. The moment a water right becomes collateral, it becomes a source of leverage. A farmer who sells his water rights for $1 million does not receive $1 million in cash. He receives a contract. The buyer, an institutional investor, does not pay $1 million in cash. The buyer borrows against the contract at a loan-to-value ratio of 70%. The lender is a commercial bank. The bank does not hold the loan. The bank securitizes the loan and sells it to a pension fund. This is the exact structure of subprime mortgage securitization. The asset is illiquid, the valuation is subjective, the leverage is excessive, and the risk is distributed across the financial system with no transparency. The valuation model for water rights is based on projected future scarcity. The more severe the drought, the higher the value of the contract. This creates a perverse incentive. Institutional investors profit from water shortages. They profit from failed infrastructure. They profit from climate instability. In August 2025, a private equity fund managed by Apollo Global purchased water rights in Nevada for $400 million. The rights were valued using a scarcity model that assumed a 15% reduction in Colorado River flow by 2030. 3 months later, Apollo's infrastructure team lobbied the Nevada state legislature to reject a proposed desalination project that would have increased water supply by 12%. The project was rejected. The scarcity model held. The value of Apollo's contracts increased by 18%. This is not market efficiency. This is engineered scarcity. This is the monetization of systemic failure. The leverage embedded in these contracts is now estimated at $12 billion. The counterparties include regional banks, insurance companies, and public pension funds. None of these institutions have stress-tested their exposure to a water market collapse. None of them have modeled the scenario where agricultural users default on lease payments because crop prices fall below the cost of water. None of them have considered what happens when a municipal water district cannot afford to renew its supply contract and declares bankruptcy. This is systemic fragility. This is the architecture of contagion, and it is already operational.
Act 4.
The closest historical parallel is not the 2008 financial crisis. It is the California electricity crisis of 2000 to 2001. The mechanism was identical. Deregulation created a market. Private companies gained control of supply. Artificial scarcity was engineered. Prices spiked. Utilities went bankrupt. The public paid the cost. Enron traders manipulated electricity supply by creating phantom congestion on transmission lines. They shut down power plants for fake maintenance. They exported electricity out of state to create shortages, then re-imported it at higher prices. The scheme extracted $11 billion from California ratepayers in 18 months. The regulatory response was slow. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission refused to impose price caps. The California Independent System Operator had no enforcement authority. Pacific Gas and Electric declared bankruptcy. Southern California Edison nearly collapsed. The state government was forced to sign long-term electricity contracts at inflated prices. costing taxpayers $42 billion over the next decade. The water market has the same vulnerabilities but with higher stakes. Electricity can be generated from multiple sources. Water cannot. Electricity demand is elastic. People reduce usage when prices rise. Water demand is inelastic. Cities cannot function without it. Farms cannot irrigate without it. Industrial processes cannot operate without it. The difference is existential. When electricity prices spike, the economy slows. When water prices spike, the economy stops. And there is no regulatory backstop. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission eventually intervened in the electricity crisis. There is no equivalent federal authority for water markets. The Environmental Protection Agency regulates water quality, not water pricing. The Department of the Interior manages federal water projects, but has no jurisdiction over private contracts. The Federal Reserve can provide liquidity to banks, but cannot force water to flow. This is the critical distinction. In 2001, the system broke, and the government could intervene. In the coming water crisis, the system will break, and there will be no intervention mechanism. The contracts are private, the markets are unregulated, and the leverage is embedded in institutions that are too big to fail.
Act 5.
The timeline for systemic failure is not hypothetical, it is actuarial. The Colorado River Basin is projected to reach critical shortage levels by 2028. At that point, the Bureau of Reclamation will implement Tier 3 cuts, reducing water allocations to Arizona by 40%, Nevada by 30%, and California by 18%. When allocations are cut, the value of existing water rights will spike. Institutional investors will profit. Agricultural users will default on lease payments. Banks holding securitized water debt will face losses. Pension funds will mark down the value of their holdings. Insurance companies will be forced to pay claims on water supply contracts that cannot be fulfilled. The contagion will spread through the financial system in the same way mortgage defaults spread in 2008. The assets are illiquid, the valuations are opaque, the counterparties are interconnected, and the regulators have no tools to contain the damage. Municipal water districts will face a choice: pay inflated prices for water or cut supply to residents. If they pay, they will be forced to raise rates, triggering political backlash and potential default on municipal bonds. If they cut supply, they will face lawsuits, infrastructure failure, and population exodus. Agricultural regions will collapse first. The Central Valley of California produces 40% of U.S. fruits, vegetables, and nuts. Farms in that region are already operating on 22% water allocations. If allocations drop further, or if water prices double, the economics of farming will become unsustainable. Land will be abandoned. Food prices will rise, and the water rights will remain in the hands of institutional investors who will hold them as speculative assets, waiting for the next buyer. This is the endgame of financialization. The resource is extracted from productive use and converted into a financial claim. The claim generates returns for investors. The economy that depends on the resource deteriorates, and the public is left with the cost. The Federal Reserve will face pressure to intervene, but the tools available are limited. The Fed can provide liquidity to banks. It cannot create water. It can lower interest rates. It cannot force institutional investors to sell water rights at affordable prices. It can purchase distressed assets, but purchasing water rights would require the federal government to nationalize a private market, a political impossibility in the current environment. The most likely outcome is a bailout. Banks and pension funds will be rescued, institutional investors will be made whole, and the public will pay through higher taxes, higher water rates, and reduced services. And this is not speculation. This is the pattern of every financialized crisis in the last 50 years. The profits are private, the losses are socialized, and the system becomes more fragile with each iteration.
Act 6.
If you are an individual actor attempting to position against the systemic risk, there are 3 analytical frameworks to consider. First, geographic exposure. If you own property, operate a business, or hold municipal bonds in the 17 western states with active water markets, Your asset values are directly correlated to water availability. Arizona, Nevada, and Southern California face the highest risk of allocation cuts and price spikes. Consider reducing exposure to real estate and municipal debt in these regions. This is not financial advice. This is risk assessment. Second, institutional counterparty risk. If your pension fund, insurance policy, or bank has exposure to infrastructure debt, request disclosure of water-related holdings. Most institutions will not provide this information voluntarily. File a formal request under state public records laws if the institution is public. If the institution is private, consider reducing your exposure. Pension funds in California, Arizona, and Texas have the highest reported allocations to infrastructure debt, which includes water rights. Third, food supply chain positioning. The financialization of water will increase food prices, particularly for water-intensive crops grown in the western United States. Almonds, lettuce, tomatoes, and grapes are the most vulnerable. If you manage a food service business or operate in agricultural supply chains, consider diversifying sourcing to regions with stable water supplies. The Midwest, the Southeast, and international suppliers in Canada and Mexico face lower water risk in the next 5 years. These are not solutions, these are defensive positions. The systemic risk cannot be hedged by individual actors. The only structural solution is regulatory intervention at the federal level, reclassification of water rights as public utilities, prohibition of leverage against water contracts, and federal oversight of water markets under the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. The probability of this intervention occurring before the crisis is near zero. The lobbying power of institutional investors is too strong. The political will does not exist, and the public is not yet aware that the crisis is underway. By the time the crisis becomes visible, the contracts will be signed, the leverage will be embedded, and the options for intervention will be limited to bailouts and rationing.
Conclusion.
In 1935, during the height of the Dust Bowl, John Steinbeck wrote, "The bank is something more than men. It's the monster. Men made it, but they can't control it." The financialization of water is the same mechanism. It is a system designed by men, but no longer controlled by them. It operates according to the logic of leverage, counterparty risk, and systemic fragility. It will generate profits for a small number of institutions. It will generate losses for everyone else, and it will continue to operate until it breaks. The timeline for failure is 6 to 18 months. The trigger will be a drought, a regulatory decision, or a default by a major agricultural user. The contagion will spread through the financial system in weeks, and the public will be told once again that no one could have seen it coming. But the warning is here. The data is public, the mechanism is visible, and the outcome is predictable. The system does not fail by accident. It fails by design.